Hey there, I'm Jordan, and welcome back to the channel. This channel is all about filmmaking techniques, the philosophy of art, creative and technical workflows, and essentially what filmmaking can teach us about life. This is the second part in a multi-video case study series on how I made my short film, Cuddle Buddies, that I wrote, directed, produced, and edited. So let's get into it. Each part in the series will cover a different aspect of production, from the creation of the idea all the way to the completion of the film and beyond. And I first want to preface that this is purely my creative workflow, so this might not be a one-size-fits-all for everybody. The first part in this series covered the writing phase of the script, so I highly recommend checking out that video before you get into this one. The second part will cover the pre-production and planning phase before the shoot of the film. So what is Cuddle Buddies? The logline is as follows. Cuddle Buddies tells the story of Lucy, a single mother who works as a professional cuddler in order to support her young daughter Marina and to alleviate the loneliness not only in her clients but also in herself. Part 1. Development. As the script was nearing completion, we started the pre-production phase probably around 2 to 3 months in advance of the actual shoot. We touched on it a little bit in the last video, but during the writing phase, I assemble a wide variety of different ideas, photos, images, all into one central database. And the reason this ends up becoming helpful is not only is it good inspiration during the writing phase, but afterwards, once we start bringing the crew on, I can show them all of these elements and inspiration, and it ends up helping answer a lot of questions that they might have right away when they come onto the project. These references could include everything from clothing styles for the characters, accessories, location ideas, cinematography and visual language ideas and references, and other pre-existing films. And all of this just helps to serve the visual language and style of the film and really help me map it out clearly so that I can articulate it to the rest of my crew. When different department heads end up coming onto the film, it really helps to be able to show everything in what I call the film's Bible. That way everybody has a shared visual language of what project we're making together, and we're all on the same page about that. For some examples of these early development documents, I'll put a link in the description below so you can check out all of the different influences we used to inspire Cuddle Buddies. Part 2, creating a lookbook. During the early pre-production phase, even as I was still refining the script, I really felt it was important to create a lookbook document, but also it would be a document that we could use to get financing. This resembled a pretty standard pitch package document, complete with synopsis, photos, visual inspiration, character and actor inspiration, quotes, and any other thing that really just got us in the headspace of what this film should feel and look like. I took some photos of my friend Sarah, who's an actress, laying against a pillow, along with some different sheet configurations to really help us sell the idea that bed and pillows and that vulnerable and intimacy that you often feel in a bed was really central to what this film was supposed to feel like. And we inserted these photos into the pitch package to have some original photos to really help sell our tone. Afterward, I sourced some various quotes to include into the package, since I always felt that this was a very poetic film visually, and different poetry quotes felt like the perfect thing to insert to help us sell that idea. After we had a rough mock-up of the pitch package document, I sourced a really good friend, Catherine Buckingham, who's an absolute whiz at graphic design, and she whipped us up the final version of the pitch package, and it looked beautiful. If you want to take a look at our original lookbook, I'll put a link in the description below. Part 3. Breaking down the script. A few months out from entering production, we put together our very first iteration of the budget. We filled in as many numbers as we could based off estimates of the going rates of different costs of doing production in LA at the time, and ended up with a ballpark number of around 12 to 15,000 based off the production needs that are in the script, and also estimating that we could do this at the highest caliber possible. I should note there was probably a version of this that was closer to 5 to 7K, but I just knew that I wanted to pull this off with a higher scale, and that's the number we ultimately landed on. Part of the art of budgeting is a lot of prior experience, but also part of it's just starting to fill in the template and sourcing those numbers and rounding them out as you go, and also asking people around who have worked with different vendors, different locations, different actors, different rentals, and seeing how much they got their equipment for, and then trying to see if that works for your budget or if you need to consider elsewhere or even scale down. You always have to keep in mind inflation as you're budgeting, since a camera package, for example, might go for a certain amount a year or two ago, ago, and that same package today might go for a lot more. So it's always good to keep up with the going rates of things and how they are also continuing to raise with the cost of living. You start to pick up pretty quickly what the going rates of most things are, especially if you ask enough people and if you've had prior experience doing a production of this nature. This makes it much easier to anticipate what each line item on the budget is likely to cost. We figured out the absolute lowest we could do the film for and figured out that anything below 10,000 would dictate cutting major story elements, and that was something I was determined not to do. I genuinely believe that some good old-fashioned stubbornness is one of the most helpful assets you can have in producing a film. And I think that's one of the keys to making projects on your own, is to get around all of the hardships and not make excuses for why you can't do it or why it's too expensive. This stubbornness also pushed me to make it for a much higher budget level, though that meant waiting a couple more years to make than I initially wanted to. To take a look at our final production budget, I'll put a link in the description below. Part 4, crowdsource funding. Now that we had a budget, the next major step was fundraising. I had prior experience using a crowdfunding platform called Seed and Spark, which is very similar to something like Kickstarter or Indiegogo. You essentially put up a campaign page with a teaser and different perks that donors will actually get if they donate to your project, and then you send it out, usually set a time limit of about 30 days, and you try to get the most donations that you can. All of the research that I did on crowdsource funding at the time told me that 30-day campaigns, really good social media marketing campaigns, as well as great perks and a really good teaser video were the keys to a very successful campaign. I wrote out a script for our crowdsource campaign, and our project DP Brennan also shot the crowdsource video in the style of how we wanted to shoot the film. We also had Jean, our resident cuddler expert, on camera just to lend her ethos to the project, and we also shot an actress in sheets to really sell the tone and idea that a lot of this film would be taking place in very intimate close-ups, but also with very soothing music, very tight, intimate spaces, and a lot of beds. Brennan, myself, one of our producers, Patterson, and Jean Franzblau, our cuddler expert, all talked on camera about the different benefits of professional cuddling, but also what this project was doing, why we needed the money, and why it was so worth it to donate to this cause that we felt was so important. I'll also be sure to link our crowdsource video and our campaign page from Seed and Spark at the description below, so you can see how we ended up getting our money. I think the strength of our teaser video did a lot to legitimize the project, but also to legitimize just the nature of professional cuddling as an industry, and really served to show people how important this narrative really was to be told. After we had launched the campaign page on Seed and Spark, I also launched an Instagram and a Facebook page, and I constantly cross-promoted the campaign, but also posted every day during that 30-day window to ensure that everybody in my network was aware of the film and had a chance to check out the page and hopefully donate. It was a ton of work to run these campaigns, and in hindsight, I think I actually would have allocated a little budget to bring on a marketing person who could have run these campaigns and probably even made us even more money on the donation side, which would have absolutely paid itself off for hiring that person. During the 30-day window of our crowdsource campaign, no plug was too shameless. I entered salesman mode and just shared it to anybody and everybody. I pitched the film. I sent them the link to the campaign page if people asked what I was working on. It really is one of those things where when you're in that mode, you got to do exactly what you got to do to get that money, and it's always worth it. Very fortunately, some friends, some family, even a total stranger that I still don't know who it is to this day, donated a very good sum of money that ultimately got us about 80% of the way to our budget, which allowed us to be greenlit. I'll admit that I donated a little bit of money from my pocket just to make sure that we had enough progress and also keep that momentum going as we started our campaign. Oftentimes, the research showed that the first 5 days of your campaign were the most crucial, since once people saw that a project had steam, it was so much easier for them to want to donate in turn. Whereas a project that didn't have a lot of momentum, it felt like people were going to donate to a sinking ship, which nobody wants to be on. So thank goodness we hit about 85% of what our final target was, which ended up being around 12K, including a little bit that Seed and Spark does take for hosting your page. Once we had 12K raised, we were ready to shoot. Part 5, starting pre-production. The entire month after the campaign ended and we got the money was solely dedicated to heavy pre-production. Now that we knew how much money we had to spend, it was much easier to know how much we could allocate to each department, but also to each line item on the budget. During that time, I took a big risk since I was freelancing, and I turned down every gig for an entire month that I really did need financially, but I knew that if I didn't do the film at that point, I was never going to do it. It was certainly a financial risk, but one that I 100% would do all over again and was so worth doing. Only happened because I made the chance, I made the time, and I did whatever it took to make it happen. And sometimes that's the cost of pursuing the dream, is you have to make it happen no matter what the circumstances are. I undertook the majority of the producing duties, but I also brought on a co-producer named AJ Vargas to help me out with a lot of the other logistics and paperwork and streamline the process of making sure that we could pull this off as smoothly as we could. Part 6. Casting. We had decided early on to be a SAG signatory production, meaning that we were going to work with the Screen Actors Guild union so that we could use SAG actors to be in our production. What this also meant is that we had to file a lot of additional paperwork, we had to pay a certain minimum, we had to tack on health and welfare, and we had to file a lot of different paperwork and time cards that we would have to submit to the union after our production wrapped. One thing to note is that by going SAG, you are inevitably adding more expenses to your budget. It also takes a lot of additional time and effort to make sure that you do things properly. So if you don't jump on it months in advance, if you don't file the proper paperwork, and if you don't do it by the certain deadlines, you can get in major trouble with the union, which is something you do not want to do. So if you don't have the adequate time and resources for your production, I would recommend using non-SAG actors for this one, and then in the future, trying to use SAG actors when you have a little more at your disposal. We ended up doing this short project agreement with SAG, or SPA, since that was the most ideal agreement that we could do for our budget at the time. At the time when we shot, which was 2019, the minimum scale was $125 for 8 hours, and then time and a half for any hours after 8 that went up to 12. And then once you get to 12, double overtime kicks in. To cover health and welfare, you also had to tack on an 18.5% of 125 for each actor involved. The short project agreement stipulated that every actor had to be paid through an official payroll company, and there also had to be workers' compensation for every actor on set in case they got injured. Again, this just meant more expenses and more time since the payroll company also took a cut of doing their work. The good news is that since then, SAG has created a micro budget project agreement, which is much easier. It's much more streamlined for projects that are under $20,000 for their budget. And really what this means is you only have to sign one initial agreement. You don't even have to track any of the Exhibit G time cards, send a packet to SAG. SAG has now made it so much easier for smaller budgeted productions that still want to use SAG actors. So thank you for that. So if you're doing an indie short now and you want to use SAG actors, I would definitely use the micro budget agreement as long as your budget's below $20K. The most thrilling aspect of pre-production for me was casting. I enlisted a very good friend, Katie Ann Moy, who is a phenomenal actor, producer, but also a great casting director. And I told her exactly what kind of roles I was looking for. And then she put together the breakdowns on Actors Access. And we did our very first round of auditions virtually through self-tapes. I ended up picking a series of sides from the script that I thought reflected the most dynamic energy of each character, but also showed the range of different emotions that they could pull off, since I wanted to see what the actors were capable of. So Katie Ann put together the breakdown, sent it out to the web, and within a few weeks, we had thousands of submissions. After Katie Ann and I discussed exactly what I was looking for in the roles, Katie Ann narrowed it down to about 15 actors for each role. And that very first round, I watched just the self-tapes and then gave my feedback on it. The only role we hadn't put out a breakdown for yet was the 6-year-old daughter, Marina, who we would eventually do a future casting call for. After that first round, I narrowed down the 15 actors to about 3 actors per role, and we called all of them in for an in-person audition at the Space Station Casting Studios in Hollywood. AJ, myself, and Katie Ann viewed some phenomenal callbacks, and that was still one of my favorite parts of the whole process, was getting to meet so many incredible actors in person, but also having them read your lines that you wrote for the first time off the page is one of the coolest things you could ever have happen. But it also really informed a lot of the different ways that I ended up taking the character, including a couple lines that I ended up changing based off things I heard in the callbacks that I really liked. As a director, I always try to give every actor the most time in the audition room as possible, just to be able to let them feel comfortable and let their best work shine, especially once they get comfortable and can really be themselves. Oftentimes you see their real personality come out by the second or third time. That's really when the work starts to shine and a lot of the nerves start to wear off, and you really get a chance to see how they also take direction, but you also see how they are as a person and if they're going to be a good fit for the project itself. The other thing I like to try to look for is, am I captivated when I watch an actor? Are they so interesting that I have to pay attention? Whether or not they're perfect for the role or not, more so what I want to see is, can they be present? Can they bring me in? I also want to see if they can release what they've prepared and just truly be in the moment. I had such an incredible cast on this one. I just want to list out the amazing actors I had. So we ended up going with Caitlin Clare for Lucy, Chris Ferrer played James, Nico Neal played Jeffrey, Christina Pesic played Fiona, Janine Oda, who played Kylie, and the wonderful Lorelai Olivia Moat played the 6-year-old Marina. When it came down to picking our lead Lucy, Caitlin Clare just absolutely nailed the spirit of what Lucy was. And I'll always remember how much Caitlin took her time in both the callback but also the first self-tape. It was something that stood out to me amongst all the other auditions I watched, was she soothed me with her voice. I noticed when I did the cuddle session with Jean, her voice was so soothing and it really just made me feel relaxed. And that's something that Caitlin just naturally delivered with her voice, her delivery, and it felt so natural.
I'm going to invite you to just lay down beside me.
So that's really what I was looking for in Lucy, is can she channel that intense rage? Fuck you, James! And can she also channel that intense love and delicacy with her daughter, but also her clients in a session? Once we ended up casting all the actors except for Marina, I made sure to schedule a lunch or a call with every single actor so that I could really get to know them better one-on-one and explain further what the role was, what the project meant to me, and really understand how they work as an actor themselves. This ended up being so useful since when we got to the actual shoot days, we ended up saving so much time because a lot of those conversations I had already had with the actors before, so it really required us to do less takes when we got to the day.